we're going to do is we're going to talk about the future of crowdfunding, and I will pass it off to my colleague and good friend Sherman. So I'll pass it off, and thank you, Sherman, and thank you, Christopher, for joining us. And then right afterwards, we'll pick it back up with a number of amazing founders that are ready to pitch for you. So take it away, Sherman.
Awesome. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Chris, for agreeing to talk to us. I will move out the way really quickly. And Chris, how about you give a background on SeedInvest as well as yourself?
Yeah, sure. So SeedInvest, as Sergio mentioned, is one of the leading crowdfunding platforms in the United States. I guess, high-level numbers, we have invested over $180 million since we started about 8-9 years ago into about 150 companies to date. I think in terms of the dollar amount per company, it changes. It's anywhere from kind of $500,000 on the low end. And then the largest check we've ever written into a single round was over $20 million. So quite a wide spectrum there. And as far as, where that capital's coming from, it's really three kind of distinct and unique sources. So first, we have a network of institutional and accredited investors. When you break that apart a little bit, that's just everywhere from angel investors to high net worth individuals, family offices, and then of course, venture capital funds themselves. We have about 40,000 of those registered with SeedInvest. And then next, second kind of source of capital, we have the ability to raise from kind of more retail investors, non-accredited investors. Those are much larger in number, but typically write smaller checks on an individual basis. So we ourselves have over 200,000 registered. And of course, a company, if they are, for example, direct to consumer, they can go out to their own customers and convert them into investors, which is a pretty powerful relationship. And then the last source of capital, we do manage our own internal fund. It works as a co-investment vehicle. And when it does invest, we make $200,000 flat checks. We don't vary. We just don't want to, pick favorites. But that's kind of high level. SeedInvest, as for my background, kind of worked on Wall Street my entire career, came out of undergrad, worked at an investment bank, and then later private equity, went to Columbia Business School, and then actually started a few of my own companies. So I've been, in kind of both roles now. And that's actually how I met SeedInvest, through kind of raising capital for one of the startups that I had at the time. So yeah.
Great. I'd be interested to hear can you give us a percentage breakdown of your capital that's actually invested, or capital that you have that is syndicated? So you mentioned how you have your angels, you have your retail guys, and you have more your institutions. What is the percentage breakdown of each tranche about how much money you're able to get from each tranche?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not going to be able to give you an exact percentage. And that's just because each company has a little bit of choose your own adventure. So for example, they could in fact raise only from the accredited and institutional investors. And in that scenario, it would be 100%, right? Alternatively, a company could raise from both. But I'd say, at a really high level, the number of investors is obviously much higher when we come to non-accredited, but the dollar amount tends to skew towards the institutional and accredited. So, probably accurate to say 80-20 rule on most capital raises. 80 being the kind of institutional accredited, and then 20 being the kind of retail investors.
Understand. And then you guys started, you said, I think SeedInvest started 8 or 9 years ago. So we were in a bull market, obviously up until about 15 days ago. So what are your thoughts on crowdfunding investments in a bear market? And what do you think will be the challenges, and are there any actual positives in fundraising in a market like this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and certainly there are many challenges upcoming. Some of which we just don't know yet. I think from the entrepreneur side of things, everything from supply chains to demand to capital availability will all be challenging in the foreseeable future. I think one huge difference, and you pointed out, crowdfunding frankly didn't exist back in kind of 2008, 2009. So that's one, difference. But also, many in today's workforce have simply never experienced an economic downturn before. So it's kind of new, and it's scary. I do believe this will require companies to take a very close look at what is essential to their core business and focus on getting to profitability, as opposed to, where you're in an environment where capital is flush. So to me, this is almost a positive, as kind of non-essential expenses will be wiped out, and hopefully businesses will focus on their core revenue streams to try to get to profitability. You asked about positives. I mean, and again, this is a lot, in flux, and it's a rapidly changing environment. But, one positive is resources are available and becoming more available as the weekdays progress. As an example, just at a high level, interest rates are literally at historic lows. Further, the federal government has stepped in, and the private sector is also responding. I was watching a national address the other day, and the federal government has made $50 billion available in small business support. I then went to the SBA, just because I actually took out an SBA loan in the other company that I started before SeedInvest. And they have everything from cash grants to term loans that can be approved in 24 hours. So, that's phenomenal. And I did not necessarily kind of see that quick reaction in the last downturn. And then when you turn to the private sector, a splashy example is, Bill Gates and MasterCard recently announced a $125 million accelerator program focused on finding a cure. So yeah, that's positive that we are responding so rapidly. I'd say another, general kind of positive I see is technology itself is at a very different place than it was, 12 years ago. And a perfect example is crowdfunding. It provides an alternative capital source that literally just did not exist 10, 12 years ago. So not only that, but, isolation itself on a higher level no longer halts business activity. And I know you asked about other, downturns, but, you look 80, 100 years ago, if we had to all isolate, literally commerce would come to a grinding halt. That's not the case. There are some phenomenal private sector inventions, basically, that have made remote work easier than ever before. You can just name your kind of cliches, whether it's crowdfunding or Slack or Zoom, that we're using right now. I mean, these tools did not exist. So to me, hopefully, this might help soften the economic impact.
Got it. What do you think are some of the most important things for CEOs to keep in mind? There's a lot of startups on the line here. So for some of these folks, what is the most important things for them to keep in mind while fundraising in this environment? And, please, of course, point out how fundraising in this environment differentiates from a bull market, because a lot of folks here were not, in the workforce in the last bull market.
Right. Yeah, great question. And in my mind, I see kind of two crucial things to keep in mind while fundraising. First, raise capital now and raise more than you think you need. Part of that is just being razor sharp with your ask. I talk to CEOs all day, every day, and they're literally paralyzing themselves through analysis. You know, they're between rounds, or this fund, you know, might commit in 6 months, or I want to prove out the product to get a better valuation, or, you know, we might close this smaller round and do a bigger round in, you know, in a couple of months. You hear all sorts of scenarios. And, you know, Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, we all just got punched in the mouth. So the point is, raise capital now. Next, and I kind of mentioned this before, but I would certainly reemphasize, many businesses today do not focus on profitability. And, you know, so many businesses just never take the simple time to do the math on what it will take to break even. I look at pitch decks all day and I see projections, and, you know, I look at historical financials and you see one-time, you know, giant marketing charges and all sorts of scenarios. But when I'm talking to these businesses, it's very rare that they can give me a concise one-sentence answer on what it would take to break even. And that is a product of a bull market, right? And that's what's different now. What I would love to see is when I talk to a founder and they can answer the break-even question with something like, you know, I'm making up a hypothetical, but, you know, over the last 6 months, our average customer spent $37. Therefore, at a gross profit margin of 65%, I need, you know, 100 customers per day just to break even. Currently, I'm at 75 customers today. So what I need to do is figure out how to get an additional 25 customers while also taking care of customer churn. You know, to me, that's a plan. And there's kind of an old quote I love here, but if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And I simply don't hear that in conversations that I'm, you know, holding today. And again, I think that's a huge difference between a bull market and kind of where we find ourselves today.
Got it. We got a question from the audience I want to give. Jamari says that he heard the rules are changing soon, which is going to alter the landscape for crowdfunding again. So he's interested in, Jamari asked about the success rate for teams raising over $100,000, and if it is just going to make the top startups raise more or increase the bottom line for everyone. I literally read the chat. So.
Yeah, no problem. So it sounds like there's a couple of questions there. And I think the first one is startups raising $100,000. And I'm not sure if, I'm not sure exactly what they're getting at, but you know, at a very simplistic level, there is a kind of ceiling on the amount of cash you can raise from non-accredited investors before you hit certain disclosure regulations. So for example, I think it's if you raise less than $107,000, you do not have to go out and get your historical financials reviewed by an independent CPA. Whereas if you cross that barrier, then of course you'd have to go out and get your historical financials reviewed, which, you know, costs cash. I think that's what they're asking about. I could be wrong, but we at SeedInvest actually just don't do capital raises that small. So the answer is I don't know. I think, you know, the success rate of raising approximately $100,000, you know, we just kind of don't operate in that space. And then, you know, when it comes to success rate in general, what we end up trying to do, which might be different from sort of other platforms, but, you know, what we end up doing is we set kind of what's called, and this may be getting too far into weeds, but we set what's called an escrow minimum. And all that means is a company has to hit this minimum, which is different for every company, in order for us to release cash to them. So what this basically is, as a kind of internal SeedInvest policy, is we like to fund companies for about 9 to 12 months of cash runway. So an easy way to think about that is, let's say you're looking at your business over the last 6 months, and on average, you know, you hypothetically burned, I don't know, $20,000 a month, right? So we might set that minimum amount of cash you need to raise at $200,000. So 20K per month cash burn times, again, 9, 10, 12 months. Now, the success rate of hitting that, again, really varies from the stage of company. So later stage companies that are more in a growth stage, these are the companies that are raising 5, 10, $20 million. We're batting 1,000. Our investors tend to generate significant demand for the later stage, significant revenue type companies that are more mature, I'd say, on the business life cycle. Now, when it comes to smaller capital raises, maybe 500,000 for a company that's maybe a little earlier stage, it's a little bit hit or miss. It's probably batting 500, maybe kind of 50-50 on the very low spectrum. Meaning, this is just an idea, just getting going, maybe an MVP, a couple of pilots. That's just harder, and I think investors look at it as a little more speculative in nature. So yeah.
Got it. Well, Chris, thank you for your time. I think we're out of time. I just got the signal from Sergio. So yeah, we all thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate you both. Thank you, Sherman, of managing partner of the Academy Investor Network, and then also Christopher George of SeedInvest. Thank you both.